Alright YouTubers, this is the Disposalist, and in this video I'm going to tell you what I think of Battlefield 2042. This is going to be a little rough, and up front I want to make a disclaimer. This is not a bad game. There's enjoyment and fun to be had. I will be playing Battlefield 2042 with my buddies, and I'd much rather play it than something like Call of Duty, for example. It is Battlefield, but there is also much frustration. For a Battlefield fan and veteran, there's much disappointment. Obviously though, these are my views and are somewhat subjective. I feel I should also give a little bit of history. I have loved every Battlefield as a general and overall improvement in a great franchise up until Battlefield 5. Battlefield 1 for me was a goosebump-inducing awesomeness right from day one. Battlefield 5, unfortunately, was a depressing disappointment all the way from the alpha, and for me, never much improved. I think I gave it about 60-70 hours and then managed to get a refund. That may seem a little harsh, but at the time I was still enjoying Battlefield 1, and so Battlefield 5 was a real disappointment, and I just didn't need it. I carried on playing Battlefield 1. It's been 5 years now, though, of Battlefield 1, and though it is still a great game, I and my buddies are more than ready to try something new. So whilst we're still enjoying Battlefield 1, hopes were running high. And though they have in many ways been dashed, we will be playing Battlefield 2042 in the future. So with all that in mind, what do I think of Battlefield 2042? This video is already going on and I could talk about this for a long time. So what I'm going to do up front is just give you my recommendation right away, and then you can just stop and not listen to me whining and moaning about it any further. So my recommendation is this: don't buy it, at least not yet. I think it will be months before it's in a less than frustrating state. I also think it won't receive much of a redesign and as much attention as it should, because like Battlefield before, comments from EA and DICE indicate that they think it's great and that there's very little is wrong. I also anticipate that it may well be on sale relatively soon, much like Battlefield 5 was, so perhaps worth waiting for that. And I think probably like Battlefield 5, after about a year it won't receive much support and they will move on to the next version. For those that don't own Battlefield 1, go buy that. It's better, even after 5 years. For those that don't own Battlefield 5, that's on sale regularly, so maybe after years of updates and fixes, that's probably a better game too. If I see it on sale, I'll probably give it a chance myself. So yeah, if you'll take my largely subjective recommendation, don't buy it. Not yet, anyway. So with that disclaimer and recommendation in mind, what's the rest of the video about? Well, I am going to complain quite a lot, but there's a lot to complain about, unfortunately. I will do my best to throw in some positives where they come up, but almost always those are tempered by constant frustrations. There's a bug and a frustration and a weirdness every few seconds playing this game. I can't possibly list all the problems to you. I really can't. I was alt-tabbing to a notepad every few seconds, and the process itself was frustrating, though I did play for a good long time. I think I've had about 60 hours now, but I played a lot of that without concentrating on making notes for an upcoming YouTube video and just trying to enjoy the game. And yeah, every few seconds there's just something. Now, I know this is early access, but what does that mean? On Steam, early access is almost a pre-alpha version. Often you really expect it to have bugs, and you're told that. This, though, it's early access, is supposed to be a release version. People have paid extra money to play this game a week or so earlier than others. You expect it to be a release standard version, and yet we're seeing something that's much more like what a beta should be. And whether that's intended or not, to me, it does not speak well of the state of the game and the development in general. It was delayed, and then they said they were making good progress, and now this just does not bode well for the future. DICE have released a list of issues known for this release, almost like it is a beta, but man, there are a lot more problems that they really should have, and no doubt did know of before they released this version. And considering recent comment from the studio tends to be along the line of how wonderfully well received the product has been, it just makes you wonder what is going on with them in general. I'll just quickly touch on a few of those known issues, but only the ones I encountered. They recently said that they acknowledged the unable to load persistent data error. I got that a lot, several hours where I couldn't get a game at all. And they say that you should disable crossplay, perhaps, to try and avoid that, but they're still working on it. Yeah. XP is not being awarded in some matches, and they say that some 120-player servers, and you should play 64-player to maybe avoid that problem. And yeah, I personally think the introduction of 128 players is the cause of a lot of issues in this game. Apparently there are some instances of rubber banding, they say. Man, there are a lot of instances of rubber banding. Nearly every game, and several times during the game, you would encounter rubber banding. Apparently, the Manifest Maps weather station has flickering lights on PS5 only that you should try and avoid if you're photosensitive. I want to tell you that there are flickering lights everywhere that if your soldier dropped down next to, say, and you are photosensitive, you would have a problem with. Just about every map had them. Apparently some miscellaneous issues are causing players to get stuck in geometry. It happened a few times to me, so I'm pretty sure that's widespread, not just some miscellaneous issues. And sometimes bots are unable to revive downed players. Well, that makes sense because often players couldn't revive downed players. Ranger can fail to respond to orders. I didn't even know you could give it orders. There's little or no instructions in the interface. As usual. The lock-on sound can continue for anti-aircraft. Yep, or it can fail completely to happen. The lock-on is a very buggy mechanic in general, I found. Parachutes sometimes remain open even after landing. Oh yes, I saw that a lot. It was hilarious to see an open parachute follow a player around as he's running around on the ground, and obviously it made them a doddle to spot and kill. So that was just a few picked out of the problems that they acknowledge. There are a lot more problems than that. So my list, the headliners are there was so much lag. Now I've read in various places that it's not optimized yet. My response is, well, it shouldn't have been released yet then. My suspicions are though that a lot of compromises happened due to the 128 player limit that no one asked for. They have already admitted that they've made some compromises, like not being able to have high hertz servers for consoles, because the consoles just can't manage the processing necessary. I believe that means there's going to be many more, and there are already those being exhibited. You can probably see on the clips behind this voiceover that I've got the FPS monitor running, and constantly the CPU-based FPS is running at half or less than the GPU-based FPS. Now, I'm not entirely sure, but I think what that means is the graphics card is saying, hey, I can do 100 FPS here, no problem. But because of CPU limitations, the game's actually only outputting 50 or less. Maybe more, usually less. Now, I'm no expert, but if the game itself can't output the number of frames that your graphics card can handle, that's got to be down to things like having to process so much stuff for so many players simultaneously. And one thing I can tell you for definitely that I've observed and other players have said in-game is that destruction on a large scale, when blowing up the gas containers on one particular map, but there are other examples, then you would get massive stutter and lag following that, because I think that kind of large-scale destruction having to be rendered for all the players in the game was causing the actual servers or the client or both to have issues. So in summary, yep, lag is bad, and that's either server or client performance or both, and I think it's down to the 128 players. It's going to impact a lot of things, but clearly it's already impacting destruction. Players were criticizing the lack of destruction in the game. I think there's a reasonable amount, but it becomes obvious that destruction is an issue to try and render for everyone, so it's no wonder that there isn't a lot, and there will probably have to be less. Maybe that'll have to be cut down in order to fix the performance issues. So my next biggest issue for the game, and I'm not sure if this is something they can fix or whether it's related to the performance issues, is everything feels a tad disjoint and floaty is the phrase that keeps coming to mind. The overall feeling of the game is very hard to describe, but whereas Battlefield 1 to me felt quite real and immersive, gritty and solid, Battlefield 2042 feels, like I say, floaty. It may be related to the performance issues, but I feel much less real and immersed. It's almost like you're struggling with the remote controls of a soldier that isn't me, rather than simply controlling a soldier that is me. And vehicles too feel this way, and there are definite moments of them being unresponsive or floaty and bouncing into the air. I remember once Jack Frags praising the apparent graphics of a tank going over an obstacle, and the tank tracks and wheels just moved into the tank. The suspension was very clear, and it was a nice effect. And my experience actually in the game is often when your tank hits an object, you bounce up into the air like the tank weighs half a ton instead of 20 tons. There's another tank example as well that speaks of the weird experience, and that to me is when you operate the turret. If you're in first person, its rotation speed is limited, which I know makes sense, but it feels bad. But worse than that, if you operate that same turret in a third person, you have the bizarre combination of your viewpoint swinging at the speed you can turn your head, but the aim of the gun following on at the limited speed of the turret, so it lags. It can't catch up to you. You unless you wait for a while, it constantly is catching up, which feels awful. I know it makes sense for a tank to only be able to swivel its turret at a particular speed, but it just feels awful to operate, and that extends to all vehicles and the soldiers too, to some degree or other. That disjoint between how you want it to react when you're controlling it and how it actually reacts. Another example is the head bob moving of the crosshairs. It may well be normal, and I appreciate and agree that you should be more accurate when you're standing still, and that needs to be represented in game, but I think that shouldn't be actually represented by bobbing your crosshairs or your viewpoint around, but by changing the accuracy of your shots, perhaps. I mean, when I run in real life, I don't experience my vision bumping up and down in a jarring way. I know if I tried to take a shot while I'm running, I'd have a much harder time, but that's because my body is moving and not because my whole vision is affected in some odd way. And that just feels odd in game. It feels weird, unimmersive, disjoint, other negative adjectives. So as I say, maybe the design is fine and it's the execution that's flawed, or maybe it's the performance that's affecting the execution of an okay design, but something in there, some attempt at realism or not, it just doesn't feel good, whereas it felt great in Battlefield 1. It's perhaps connected that some people criticize Battlefield 1 for its random bullet deviation. Comes to mind, but the alternative, it seems, in order to maintain balance and realism, is to have an unpleasant jarring effect and a general wobbliness in the whole experience. And the recoil model, I find, in Battlefield 2042 is horrible. I know some people perhaps prefer it, but I regularly, especially when sniping, can't even see where my shots land because the recoil is so horrendously jarring. It was much moaned about, the random deviation in Battlefield 1, but it had the same overall balancing effect without the unpleasant feeling to it, and I can only imagine that that's why Battlefield 2042, and I think Battlefield 5 at the time, didn't feel good to me when you're playing it. It's all linked. I've made a bit of a confused hash of explaining it, but it's all linked. Another thing to talk about is the UI or UX, the user interface or user experience. Words I've written down are confusing, unintuitive, unwieldy, bloated, buggy, underperforming. I had noted quite a few things, and since I've removed, because I've worked out how to do it, but the point is it took me quite a while to work out how to do it, and even then it's painful to operate. Something else from the user interface, the user experience, are all the unnecessary cinematics. I'm pulled away from the useful bits of the UI, like adjusting my loadout, customizing my weapons, by unskippable cutscenes that I've seen 1,000 times before, and it's more than annoying for that to happen. It might seem picky, but I think it's also indicative of the general trend for adding in cool stuff, these cinematics, rather than prioritizing the actual experience of the player, something that they benefit from rather than something that's just cool. I mean, it would be cool to have useful interface. For example, keep the voiceover for the round start, and you need a delay while the game maps load and the players load, but allow access to the loadouts and the customization options, and let me see the map and the spawn points so I can start planning my game, just like Battlefield 1 lets you do right now. And often that cool stuff, it isn't really cool stuff. It's subjective. It's some exec's idea of what's cool. Things like the cringy end-of-round highlight comments by the specialists. I'm not overconfident, I'm just better. That's a terrible South African accident, but the point is, they just sound like egotistical asshats. I didn't like that classes were removed already, so making the specialists dislikable on a personal level is kind of an own goal. Another aspect of the UI that was greatly criticised in Battlefield 5, but they've stuck with in Battlefield 2042, is the commo rows and the connected spotting mechanic. Now, whether or not you agree with 3D spotting in the game at all, if you're going to put the mechanic in, let's make it work. So on the one side, the spotting mechanic itself is difficult to operate. It actually acts like a flying bullet. Whilst there's no bullet drop, it has a velocity, so it takes time to reach its target. It's not a high velocity either. And worse, when you do regularly miss with the spotting mechanic, it then places a point and instructs your teammates to charge that point. So I'll be desperately trying to warn them there's a tank around the corner, and what they will be seeing is go around the corner and attack. It's just amazing that this stuff gets through testing or even design. So, not that they'll take my suggestions, but you should be able to, I think even in Battlefield 3, you had the feature to be able to point at a location and tell your teammates what you think is there. You could do it specifically and explicitly, and the game didn't try and do it for you and make a mess of it. That's all we need. We need something that they developed 10 years ago. I've got a whole load of specific examples that I could talk about at this point, but I think I'm going to just wrap it up into one general point, and that is EA or DICE or whichever seem much more interesting in adding cool features than they are in improving and maintaining an already excellent and popular product. And this is leading me to get up on my soapbox, because it's not just EA and DICE, to be fair. It seems all big companies these days aren't happy with simply producing a good product for the audience they know love it. They must expand to the mass market and make it appeal to everyone by adding on feature after feature or homogenizing the existing stuff till you end up with a bland core with a load of crap attached to it that no one wanted. But before this turns into a general rant, let's turn it back around and talk about 128 players. Now, I am a Battlefield veteran and fan by pretty much any measure. I've been playing it since 1942, not the year, the game. Been active on the forums, and I do not remember anyone asking for 128 players. I specifically do recall a lot of people saying 64 was too chaotic and too much, especially for some game modes, but no one was asking for 128 players. I can only guess that some marketing exec somewhere thought the bigger number was just simply better and would be cool, and no one had enough clout to push back. The problem, of course, is that these cool marketing ideas have implications to the game, and 128 players means we have to have huge maps to accommodate that, and that changes the gameplay massively. It also apparently means that there are technical implications to overcome, and to accommodate, and to compromise over. DICE themselves have admitted that 128 players means consoles can't have high tick rate servers, and I'm sure that that's not the only compromise they've had to make to accommodate it. To bring this back round to my in-game experience, what 128 players means to me is you are mostly either A, running, B, killing yourself and redeploying rather than run any further, or C, the occasional chaotic mass battle where you can't avoid being flanked because there's so many players. So, as I say, I know some people will love that chaos, but I can't imagine it's anything like the majority of the player base, and considering the difficulty of developing 128 player games and the compromises it must have meant in other areas, I'm just dumbfounded that design decision made it through the design stage, let alone survived once they started to realise the technical implications of it. And that really should have been the same for a lot of the design decisions in this game, I think. So, there is a lot more to talk about, but I'm exhausting myself being this negative, so I can only imagine how you're feeling. I'm going to leave it there, I think, and what I'm going to do is play the game some more. As I've said, I am going to play this. My buddies are going to play this. There's fun to be had. And I always have fun playing with my gaming buddies, no matter what the game is, to be honest. So that doesn't exactly speak well of Battlefield. It just speaks well of playing games with your friends. I anticipate that things will get better. Bugs will be fixed, at least some. I don't imagine any big designs are going to be changed, but tweaks will perhaps be made that improve things. Oh, one thing I would say is Portal. I would not rely on Portal addressing all your hopes and dreams. Whilst it will allow you to tailor the experience to some degree and cut out some of the features you don't like from Battlefield 2042, perhaps, it, from what I've played, is the same experience or worse even. If you can imagine all the things that are wrong with Battlefield 2042 and then it being cut down to look and play a bit like Battlefield 1942, then yeah, you are left with what is essentially Battlefield 2042, only worse. I have to admit I didn't play Portal that much, but that's because I didn't enjoy it very much. It does have potential to be entertaining, a bit of a laugh, a bit of a change, but I can't see it being a big part of my Battlefield experience ongoing. Now, if they take the Portal customization options and point that at Battlefield 2042 itself, that I could see being a very good feature. I'll cross my fingers for that in the future, because it's one way that they could definitely help improve Battlefield 2042 itself. So, to summarise, Battlefield 2042... it's full of bugs, it performs badly, it should improve in the future, but I honestly don't have much hope for it given what EA and DICE did or didn't do for Battlefield 5. My recommendation overall is not to buy it yet, at least not unless it goes on sale very soon, which it might. I was sorely tempted to try and get a refund and do exactly that myself, but part of my experience with the game is to make these YouTube videos as well. That's a hobby for me, that's a whole part of this, so having the game means I can continue to do that. And as I say, my gaming buddies have all voted for giving it a try this time around, so you can expect to see more Battlefield 2042 videos from me in the future. Hopefully they'll be a bit more positive, because hopefully Battlefield 2042 will have got a bit better, but we'll see. So, as always, thanks for watching. Hope that wasn't too depressing for you. Please leave a like if you found my moaning entertaining, and if you'd like to have more moaning in the future, then please subscribe. That will help the channel. And I'll see you on the battlefield maybe in the future.